Well, folks, it's really an honor of mine to host Chris Arnade. Hopefully, I did not. Did I say that correct, Chris?
You got it right. Congratulations. No one else gets it right.
I know. That's. I think I get a few brownie points. I really. I am just. I just was telling Chris before we went on the air how much of a big fan I am since reading his book Dignity that I bought, and it's he's an amazing story that we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk really about his story, especially during a 2 year of a pandemic, and how he walks America and all of the stuff that he actually does. But Chris, before we start, I am very fascinated by your background that I got to learn when I read your book Dignity. So tell me a little bit about you. You have a PhD, you work as a trader. Just tell us a little about your personal story, and then how did you end up making a decision you're going to walk America and the world?
I wish I had a neat explanation for everything, but I'll give the bare bones outline. Grew up in a small town. My father was a Jewish immigrant who came from Germany. Ended up in the South. And a small southern town during the 60s and 70s. My mother was a farm girl from Michigan. They met. They had a family of 7 kids. I was the last of 7. And we grew up in a very strange situation where we traveled all over the world. My father was very explory. All 7 of us would go all over the world. He dragged us all over the world to all his crazy places. And that kind of, I guess, instilled in me something of a desire to kind of, be a curiosity. But I was one of those kids who was kind of always good at math, just came naturally. So I ended up, I know it sounds crazy to say this, but I guess my path of least resistance, I ended up with a PhD in particle physics. It was just one of those things you just do because it's just natural and easy,
I don't know, it doesn't sound easy. PhD in particle physics. That doesn't strike me as easy.
Well, in some senses it was easier than dealing with people, right? So you can just kind of you lose yourself in the numbers and you play these games, and lo and behold, you got a PhD in physics. But I was really there's something about it that just wasn't fitting with me, and that was the people part, which I really wasn't around people. It was kind of a lonely pursuit in some ways. You kind of sitting there in a room playing with equations, and to be honest, I wasn't particularly great at it. Like have a career in particle physics, you have to be really, 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 really good about it, and I wasn't really, really good at it. So I ended up on Wall Street. They liked people they were at the time. This is '93, straight out PhD program. They were hiring people. They had just started hiring people with math degrees. To do what now is called rocket scientist. And I guess that's kind of a thing that people know now, but then it was there weren't many of us there doing it. Why I ended up on Wall Street, it's not really clear why. I mean, I was just kind of searching for things to do. I did hurricane research for a while. I was just playing around, and somehow, they were willing to pay me a lot more money than I ever thought I would make to kind of play with equations again. But also there was something really nice about the immediacy of it. Like, as somebody who had been working on problems all my life that were never solved in some ways, it was kind of nice to, work on problems that had tangible results. And I ended up a bond trader. And I did that for, so if you've ever seen the movie The Big Short or read the book The Liar's Poker, I actually went to the firm that Solomon Brothers at Liar Poker is from. And so that was kind of my life for 20 years. But I never really kind of lost the things my father had and my parents had given me, which was this kind of natural curiosity. And so I often did these extraordinarily long walks when I was working in Wall Street. It was just kind of on Saturdays and Sundays on my days off when I wasn't working. Sometimes, early on before we had kids, my wife and I would go take the subway to the end of the line and walk home, in Manhattan, in New York City, sometimes, 15-mile walks, 12-mile walks. And then my wife kind of got bored of it, and I started just doing it myself. And also being kind of a geeky guy, I kind of started having to do these walks with intentions of like I try to walk the entire New York subway system above ground. So I went to the end of every subway with the terminus and walked home. And then over time, those walks.
Why? Like you just wanted to walk? Like what?
I like walking. You know, walking is kind of always been my kind of you know, it's when I think, it's how I explore. It's kind of my kind of, I guess some people, you know, do yoga. Some people jog. I always kind of just found walking to be very therapeutic. And the walks ended up, you know, as my career kind of changed in Wall Street, and as I became disillusioned with Wall Street, and we can talk about that later, but kind of the big changes that were taking place, and kind of as you reach middle age, and you start wondering, like, you know, okay, so I'm making some money, but like, what's the real point of all this? The walks kind of started taking on more of a kind of meeting people. And so along these walks, I'd meet people. And that really changed when I got a camera. Someone gave me their old camera like in 2007. And, you know, the camera I started taking pictures of some of the things I saw on my walks. And that kind of became an entry point to talk to people. People would ask me, I was often in these neighborhoods where I was, you know, clearly an outsider. I was either the only white person, you know, or what have you. And so people would naturally ask me questions, and then we would talk, and they'd ask me to take their picture, and they would tell me about their life. And then soon the walks evolved and kind of into this kind of almost like, you know, just this new way of learning away from the, you know, I'd been spending all my life learning from numbers, learning from kind of books. And now I was kind of like out there just talking to people and kind of letting events take me wherever they took me. And so the walk stopped having a real point. Like they just kind of, they became, if you looked at a map of my walks, they used to have like, you know, kind of like a start here, end here, with kind of the most logical path in between. And then eventually it became almost random walks where I just kind of went wherever events took me. And they took me into things like, I got really interested in people who keep pigeons on their roofs. You know, you go into these neighborhoods and there's people keeping pigeons on their roof. And it became, I really got into that. I started talking to them. I got into, you know, these Mexican bars where, you know, where I'd meet people who were very different from me, but were also very welcoming of me. And so I started spending lots of times in these kind of Mexican bars where these guys who, you know, have left their family to make money and, you know, live tend to like a building where they go to kind of, you know, to let loose after all their stress of working so hard. And so it kind of took me into all these weird places. And as that happened, I became more interested in that. And then I kind of got less interested in my job on Wall Street. And eventually I quit my job on Wall Street because eventually those walks took me into a neighborhood, Hunts Point, which is, you know, it's known for all the wrong reasons. It's known as one of New York City's poorest neighborhoods. It's known as having high crime. It's known where there's a lot of prostitution. It's known where there's a lot of drugs. And kind of the group of people I ended up spending time with eventually was homeless addicts, heroin addicts, junkies, whatever you want to call, whatever negative term you want to call them, people who live in abandoned buildings, in cars, under bridges, kind of a, you know, ad hoc, what is basically a street family of about 30 to 40 long-term users, you know, dealers, prostitutes. You know, that's I use the term they call themselves prostitutes. They don't call themselves sex workers. And ended up spending roughly 3.5 to 4 years kind of, quote, documenting, becoming friends with them, but also, you know, documenting through photos and essays kind of what their life was like. And then from there, partially due to burnout, because, you know, when you're that close to that much pain, it can really impact you. I ended up basically, and also intellectual curiosity. I kind of learned all these things I saw in Hunts Point that I wanted to know if they were true in a broader way. Was this Hunts Point, or was this kind of like more universal truths? So, or to put it in a geeky math term, was what I learned in Hunts Point translationally invariant? Was it true in Pittsburgh? Was it true in Oakland? Was it true in LA? And so I, I got my family van and I ripped the back seats out and put a bed back there, and I drove 300,000 miles around the country, kind of doing similar things in similar parts of the country, all with my family's approval. I would go off for 4 weeks and then come back for a month, go off for a month, come back for a month, and kind of, was doing something of a, I guess, an academic term, something of ethnography, I think is what it's, they call it, of basically immersing myself with a group, with people who have pretty rough lives and are pretty much on the bottom fringe, people that I think people in healthcare know as kind of, people who are in the emergency room a lot, and use the emergency room as primary care. And I was in and out of hospitals a lot, visiting people who were in and out of hospitals, Lincoln Memorial in particular, what they call Stinking Lincoln, up in McDonald's a lot, in churches a lot, and in and out of Rikers to visit people. So it was kind of a unique path, I guess, but for me, it made a lot of sense. And then it resulted in the book Dignity that you talk about, which is where I try to write up what I did. And then I took basically, after writing Dignity, I took a year off, stopped doing it, and try to reevaluate what I wanted to do. And then COVID hit. And I did what everybody else did, which was kind of buckle down and sit here to the degree I could sit here. I was very fortunate that I could basically sit in my room for basically 6 months. And then once I got vaccinated, I kind of had decided what I wanted to do, which was, go back to walking. I had pivoted to doing a lot of what I did was via my van. I was, driving everywhere, and I would walk in the cities I was in, but I realized I'd gotten kind of lazy in some sense, and I was relying more on the van. I realized that what I wanted to do was actually walk, go back to the original model of walking, because that's where you really learn. You really learn a lot, because you're forced to deal with situations. When you walk across Orlando, for instance, you have to deal with situations that you could never imagine, and you deal with people who are not easy to deal, who not easy to find necessarily. And so I've been doing this now, where I'm doing this thing of I'm just literally walking roughly 12 to 13 miles a day. I had thought about maybe walking across the United States, but I find walking through cornfields really boring. You do it once, I'm not sure what the point is. So I'm kind of driving from town to town. And then once I go to town, I just spend a week or 2 weeks just walking the town, or 3 days, just literally walking across the town. And I'm doing that also now across the world. I just got back from Kiev, where I spent 2 weeks walking Kiev. I mean, literally walking across Kiev multiple times, 15-mile walks, over the bridges, up over the rivers, etc.
And I've seen a lot of your Twitter photos in Kiev. I'm going to talk about the international piece in a little bit, but if it's okay, Chris, I want to just go back a little bit down memory lane. And
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I said sure.
I want to talk just a little bit about Wall Street a little bit, because I'm gonna take a hypothetical guess, which I don't think when you started Wall Street and you finished your PhD in physics from Hopkins, you did not think you're gonna be spending your life walking the world.
That is correct.
Yeah, so that's a good guess on my part. Hallelujah. But in Wall Street, you spent 2 decades, and I presume you were handsomely paid, and you did well. It seems it's a tough, like, what happened? Were you just burned out? Like, it's a tough, such a change in lifestyle from Wall Street, and probably more of a cushy lifestyle than what you're doing now. Did something happen during your Wall Street that made you say, okay, I'm done with this, fed up with Wall Street, and I'm just gonna do something completely different?
There is no one instance. I think there are two things. One is I'm very, I always say that me and my wife never really escaped grad school. Even when we were in Wall Street, we lived relatively simply. Um, I mean, we ended up by, by luck as well as circumstances, ended up having a really nice apartment. But it was never something where we like splurge. I always had a minivan. I've never. I think I splurged when I bought a new minivan, but I've never had nice cars. I've never really. I honestly, at a personal level, do not enjoy luxury. Like you know, uh, sometimes when I give talks, I really ask, and people think it's kind of an affectation, but it's really like they want to put me up in a nice hotel. I'm like, please, can I just stay like in a Motel 6? Like I much prefer that. I don't feel comfortable with. I'd rather be in a cheap motel than a luxury motel. I really would at a personal level. So there was always. So in some senses,
well, why is that? Like, do you think, like, is there, like, it's like if you tell a random person that you want to stay at the Four Seasons or at Motel 6, I would say maybe 99% of people say Four Seasons. Like, what do you think?
I mean, I've always wondered why. I mean, like, it's just something that, like, I've never, partly it's the people. I've never been comfortable around people who have a lot of money. And that sounds crazy for someone who worked in Wall Street, but like, um, it was kind of one of those things where I grin and bear. I still have some great friends in Wall Street who are very wealthy. So, it's not like a hard fast rule, but like, there's something that's kind of, to me, I really am much more comfortable in Applebee's than I am kind of like Le Bernardin. Like, I mean, it's just, to me, it's more relaxing, it's more genuine. I enjoy, I enjoy the company more than I do with people who I feel like have a lot of that's not to say I don't like intellectuals. I absolutely love intellectuals. I'm unabashed intellectual. I read when I'm walking, I listen to the Iliad, I like, I go to operas, but that doesn't mean I like to necessarily, be around people who I feel like are very uptight and have a lot of are working to display or showing off who they are, and making a lot of small talk. I'd rather just hang out in a bar and talk about talk about the NFL. Because I think within a lot of those conversations, there's a lot more going on than people realize. Kind of the small talk at Applebee's has a lot more depth to it than people realize. But also, I mean, I'm not really sure. It's something, but maybe the way I was raised. So, I mean, so the transition wasn't that hard, to go to where I am now. I do spend less than I've ever spent before. Like I said, I'm relatively cheapskate. But there was no one instance where I think the financial crisis was, the industry on Wall Street changed. It went from being kind of these smaller firms like Solomon Brothers that was kind of, you had a partnership mentality and there was a real sense of ownership. And the people involved were often a lot of characters because it wasn't as highly credentialed. There were people there who were former who were just street smart, who were kind of former, there was a guy who was like a former elevator repairman who was just like he was a really street smart guy. Like people, the kind of people you meet in kind of like marketplaces across the world, just kind of natural traders, who don't have a lot of education. And then it moved to kind of a highly credentialed big firms, and that just kind of was working in a big organization. It just didn't fit me. But also the financial crisis was a big deal. Prior to the financial crisis, to the degree I was thoughtful about it, I was a young kid. I was trying to make money. I had a family. I had kids. If you'd asked me like in 2003, what was like, what's up? Why are you doing this? And I would have said, look, it's neither morally good or morally bad. It just is, it's benign. And it's not like, being cosmologist doing particle physics is this noble thing. It's pretty selfish too. You're sitting there doing something that's kind of very, just very, very, very selfish, learning about the universe. And like, it's not really, you're not really doing quote public good. But after the financial crisis, it was pretty clear that we fucked up. and it wasn't just this morally neutral thing. It was a pretty bad thing. And so, I kind of had expected a lot of the other people in the industry have had the same realization, like, wow, we really fucked up. What are we going to do here? What are we going to do about it? And that wasn't the case. A lot of people kind of were in much more denial, and they looked at the financial crisis like, what do you mean? We didn't do anything wrong. It's the poor people that did something wrong. They shouldn't have borrowed money from us, And so that was kind of that was kind of one of these kind of like, okay, there's a big kind of almost a quantum leap between, like, I just kind of took a step down and going, okay, this is not for me. And I wrote it out for another 4 years for a variety of reasons, out of laziness, out of like, the reality that my kids were still school aged and still going through things. And, and like I said, the money was pretty good. So, but I was over that time pivoting to kind of getting away from treating it like a day job and not really putting a lot of effort into it, and moving more towards kind of the walks and kind of, doing some things personally, and kind of mentally thinking about what was next, and trying to kind of disengaging from Wall Street and trying to figure out what to do next. And that kind of was this whole idea of realizing that, part of the reason we messed up on Wall Street was it was this overly quantitative approach that didn't really take into account the people at the other end of the people at the end of the chain. They're just blips on a screen at Wall Street, and behind the blips are people. And so I started kind of drilling down and getting towards the people.
So then, obviously you left Wall Street, and I'm going to assume you saved enough money where you felt you're going to be comfortable. You're not going to need anyone financially in terms of supporting yourself and your family. But then you decided to take the walking, I guess, as a full-time. How do you decide where to, like, what is it? What do you, I'll tell you my observation from reading Dignity, which I'm going to tell, I really would love everyone to read it. My impression as a reader, I felt you wanted me to know the real America. What I felt I realized there was a lot of addiction, and you're talking about the addiction and all of these things, but I did sense from you as a reader, and you're the writer and the photographer, that you want me to understand a society that I may never get exposed to. Am I onto something there?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, it was kind of like, what's frustrating is, and, for those in healthcare, they have a much, there's not many, I call myself, I use this division of the front row and back row, basically about education, the cultural differences. Like, if you got a PhD or a doctorate or something, you're probably you're what I call in the front row. And we in the front row are more and more segregated from the average person. I mean, that's less true in healthcare, because if you work in an emergency room, or you work in but for somebody in academics, for somebody on Wall Street, for lawyers, for politicians, it's very, very easy to just completely not know the country you make the rules for. The country you quote, the expert class has a big say in how things are constructed. I just started realizing during this process, part of Dignity came out of a political process in my mind of, this wasn't a political book to start with, but this wasn't a political project to start with. It was just kind of a selfish project of me kind of being intellectually curious. But it took on a political angle when I became very frustrated, when I realized that kind of, what I call my clique, the bankers, the academics, the people I kind of spent most of the prior 20, 30 years with, didn't understand the country. Like, not just in a, they'd never been to Portsmouth, Ohio, but they didn't understand people. They didn't understand the people who lived in Portsmouth. They didn't understand normies. They didn't understand the average American. At a very deep level, they didn't understand. They didn't understand how important faith was to them. They didn't understand how important place was to them. They didn't understand how important family is to them. Because we're so busy focusing on our careers, and we think everybody is equally focused on their career. Everybody is equally focused on the news. Everybody's equally focused on current events, which is, great. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being focused on that, but that's not how most people operate. Most people are just kind of trying to get by, trying to enjoy life to the degree they can, trying to build a family, trying to, do the best they can at, to be a good member of the congregation, to be a good, to be a good pickup basketball player, to be, just to be, their goals are a lot different than I think we think they are. And it was kind of, I was kind of trying to, if I could reframe it now, I kind of want to say, I think a lot of us who are very highly educated tend to look at the average person and think they're weird. I think we're the weird ones, what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with being weird, being an academic and being into mathematics. I mean, that's fine, but we need to understand that we're very different from the average person, and that's important to know.
As you started the walking, like you talk about the real Americans, and what was the first thing that you noticed that surprised you? Because obviously now today in 2022, as me and you are talking, clearly you have a different vision than when you started in 2012, when you just left Wall Street and you started on that journey. So as you started on that journey back then, what was the first few things that you noticed and said, oh my God, I really had no idea that this was going on?
I mean, I was kind of one of the, I was early involved in the quote heroin epidemic. So the level of addiction and the level of disruption, like in places like Portsmouth, Ohio, just a level of despair in places like West Virginia and places like in Milwaukee. I had always kind of known, like any good liberal, I had kind of always known there was problems in quote in Harlem or Bronx, but I hadn't understand how deep the addiction was and how big an influence drugs was in so many of these communities. And then the second was how important faith was. I think the biggest change, and it's kind of in some senses why I happen to think my book at many levels is very much deeply from the left, but it got odd, but oddly the book got kind of more applause out of the right, which really surprised me. And I think part of that was because of the religion angle, where I talk very openly about the importance of faith and a very in a very surprising way to me, because I jokingly say I started this project as a vegetarian atheist, and I ended up as a church-going lover of McDonald's.
Well, it's also possible that you bring in. Sometimes the left is viewed as really super elite in terms of their look at society and so on, where the right maybe is more in touch with the common American. I don't know which one is right or not, but I think it's possible that you brought in a level of truthness to real America that resonate with the right more. I don't know.
Yeah, look, the role of faith and how important it is, and that's not just about going to church. That's about how faith informs the worldview, how it kind of places them in the world. That's really one of the biggest differences between what I call the front row and the back row. I think the professional class kind of, to the degree they can ever appreciate faith, it's kind of as almost an insulting way of saying, well, the poor need religion because, they don't got anything else, so they need religion. As almost this kind of utilitarian function, but not as something that actually is deeply important or possibly true, to the level that you can something can be true. And I think the third thing I would say, going back to things that was one is the McDonald's, which I became kind of slightly known as the McDonald's guy. How important McDonald's is, and the role it plays in some of these communities is almost community centers. You spend your time in these very, at the surface level, very dysfunctional communities where things aren't open, things aren't working, and one of the two things that are open and working are McDonald's and churches. And I think one of the things I used to say, is like, if I don't do a lot of policy. I'm not a policy person. I'm not I don't get involved in it, but I used to say that, man, if one of the things I found myself doing when I was working with people who are at the very lowest margins of society was sitting at McDonald's with them, helping them fill out forms, going through, using my computer to help them navigate, healthcare systems, or help them detox centers, or the bureaucratic paperwork that's required just, to get services when you're poor. And so I used to say, is like, if I was a social worker, I would have a Thursday night at McDonald's where I would just sit there with a computer and just help people, do, all the things that are complicated when you're poor, all the paperwork necessary to get help. And so, the McDonald's is it's just really because it's a place that doesn't kick people out in general. I mean, some places do, but by and large, it's kind of one of those places where you can escape, where people on the margins can escape from the cold or the heat, and kind of gain a moment of dignity by just sitting there and being left alone, as it were.
That's that's the title of the book, Dignity. That's where it came from. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you did these walks, I'm curious to see what your political observation became, because you labeled yourself as a liberal politically, and as you started going across towns, across the countries, and across the cities, two questions. Number one, I still want to know how you pick where you're going to go. Like, for example, am I going to go to Columbus, Ohio? Am I going to go to Chicago, Illinois, or Gary, Indiana? How you decide where to go, and then as you started going to these towns and these cities, as somebody who you label yourself as a liberal, did you notice how was your describe to me just the political landscape and the observation that you've actually seen as you walked through America?
I'm still a geek at heart, so I spent, in terms of how I chose, was also informed by a lot of database. I wanted to get, once this became kind of like a project, I realized that I wanted to get kind of a snapshot of poverty in America. And so I actually looked at the data. What is poverty in America? How much of it's rural? How much of it's urban? How much of it's Black? How much of it's white? How much is Latino? And so I tried to kind of get a representation, a cross section of America by looking at rural poverty, urban poverty, Black poverty, white poverty, and then also geographically. I try to hit every part of the country, and I focused on places, towns that I felt like, were knowable in a way. Places I could spend a week in and get a sense of, or 10 days in and get a sense of, places that could, and that's also how I chose the neighborhoods too, as places like I spent a lot of time, for instance, in El Paso and LA, but the parts of LA I spent into was basically two neighborhoods. LA is massive, but I spent basically a month in two neighborhoods to get to know something, to be able to really understand, this one area. So, and also I spent a lot of time, there were like three maps I looked at a lot. One was a poverty map of the United States. The other is a an addiction map of the United States, and the third was basically, I think it was the after it was like the voting maps, look precinct levels, so I could get a kind of fair representation of political America, racial America, and kind of get a sense of, and so for instance, I spent a fair amount of time, like a week in Utah, because Utah didn't fit anything else. Utah, relative to a lot of other places, didn't fit the picture. It was poor, but there wasn't as much addiction relative to other places. So I wanted to figure out what was going on there. So there was I spent a lot of time looking at maps, and trying to figure out, and then there was just then there was also the logistics of driving. What's the most I can get out of 6 weeks drive across the country? What places can I hit? And then, things changed over time. Like I'd be Gary, Indiana, which is a place that I absolutely am fascinated by and love, and keep going back to, and is in my book, is a place that I was literally driving. I have my daughter lives in my oldest daughter lives in Wisconsin, so I was visiting her. And when you drive by there, you see Gary, and I'm like, that place really struck me. And I stopped there to, get gas. And then I marked it, like, literally I had a list in my car, like, Gary, go back, and circled it. And then, so, it visually struck me as well as a photographer. It just visually struck me. And so, I end up doing kind of like, and I still have a running list of like, basically now that I'm walking more than driving, I have a list of like, 15 towns I want to walk. And that list keeps changing as I see things, think things, build things. So it's always kind of a work in progress. In terms of the politics, I think my journey has been from the left towards the right. And I don't have a camp anymore. I'm kind of like, kind of politically homeless, like a lot of people, but it certainly was. And a lot of that came from what I saw. One was, what you alluded to in the past, which is, for a lifelong Democrat, it was very hard for me to admit that the party I came from seemed to be more out of touch with the people they claimed to advocate for. And that I saw in terms of just dealing with people. I think we on the left, and I include myself as someone there, I still have a leg in the left, tend to kind of have this idea of the working class that just isn't who they are, and you can either say, well, they should be that way, or you can say, well, they're not that way. Maybe I'm the one who's got it wrong. Maybe if I claim to believe that, we should think about their views, and their views matter, and and you got to change your mind based on that.
I want to still talk to you about the politics just a little bit, and then I want to try to pivot to healthcare a little bit. But I'm also, before I talk a little about politics, I am amazed by how good the pictures in the book are, and the photography. Is this, did you get like any formal training in that? Was just complete hobby that you fostered? Because the pictures, really, you bring it to life. Like I could totally tell that these people are in church or they're at McDonald's. They're just amazing. How did this come about?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm very proud of my photos, but I don't, I'm a self-taught photographer, but it's something that I've been doing, off and on all my life. Like I said, I was really into photography in college. When I first got to Wall Street, I was really into photography. Real old professional cameras with film, darkroom, and all that. And then, I lost interest in it, partly because of the digital revolution, and I didn't really like the digital revolution. I had trouble moving to digital. But then again, like I think in 2007, 2006, a friend gave me their old digital camera, and kind of went from there. I then immediately bought a professional level digital camera. And was, in some senses, the project began with as a photography project, but I've kind of stepped that back and try to put more and more of the writing more central to than the photography, but I still put a lot of work in my photography. Now I actually now I use an iPhone to take pictures for a variety of reasons. I mean, I'm a camera snob, so it kind of hurts sometimes to use the iPhone because the quality just isn't the same. I miss the professional level photography, but you know, dignity is the photos and dignity all come from a professional camera. But the photos I'm using now for my kind of walks around the world are coming from the iPhone, which I'm going to change. I'm going to move back to a higher level camera. But yeah, I mean, photos are really important to me.
Yeah, you know, it's as I said, I want to go back to politics, and then I will pivot to healthcare. I gotta tell you, and by the way, I mean, your book I read a couple of years ago when it came out. It came in 2019, I believe, right? Or
Yeah, I believe so.
yeah, I have a habit of actually highlighting certain things that I actually like, and sometimes I tweet these and I put them on Twitter. One of the things that I highlighted in your book, and I'll read that verbatim, it says, "We had compassion for those left behind, but thought that our job was to provide them an opportunity, no matter how small, to get where we were. We didn't think about changing our definition of success. It didn't occur to us that what we valued, getting more education and owning more stuff, wasn't what everyone else wanted." I highlighted this. This is so spot on, man. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that was one of the again, that was one of the big kind of, you know, I as a former physicist, you talked about kind of changes I had over the time. I call them wave function collapses. You know, kind of things where I'm like, it's like, you know, if you're on an intellectual journey, it's kind of you just peel and you find a new truth. And that recognition that, you know, education wasn't everything. You know, it's something that's hard for me to have admitted or realized because, you know, even though I came from a working class town, my parents were both, my father was a professor, you know, my mother was a librarian, you know, it never occurred to me not to get a PhD, you know, and almost everybody almost everybody I know around me, or, you know, my wife, my circle of banker friends, my circle of PhD physics friends, you know, obviously education. But I would also say at every level, our system, our society, you know, guidance counselors, get education. Looking great, get education. That's great. You know, I would never tell somebody not to pursue as much education as they can, but we have to recognize that, you know, that's not the end all to be all for everybody. There's a lot more to life than that. And so, I mean, there's a reason I chose the metaphor of the classroom, the front row, back row, because it really does, you know, we really do have kind of an educational meritocracy at this point, where it really is kind of like, you know, I used to say that, you know, we're as a culture right now, we're striving to limit every ism, every difference, racism. We're highlight every difference, but education is one where educational differences are one that's celebrated. You know, it's kind of like you're allowed to call someone dumb if they don't have a lot of education. That's somehow not wrong, you know. So it's kind of like we've replaced all these kind of inequalities. We've replaced all these things saying all these inequalities are bad with this inequality that we celebrate, which is one of how much education do you have?
Yeah. So then, as you know, been walking for a while, you obviously throughout the walks, you've gone through a lot of political changes between different presidents that were running against each other, different election cycles, and so on. So you were walking during the time where, for example, President Obama was running for re-election in 2012. And you were walking when Trump was running also in 2016. And you were walking when Trump was also going against Biden in 2020. And I promise my listeners I'm going to pivot to the pandemic in a little bit, and I'm going to talk about Russia as well. But I'm curious, as you walked through these three elections, did you predict, for example, that in 2012 Obama is going to win re-election? Did you predict Trump is going to win in 2016? Did you predict Trump is going to lose in 2020?
I kind of got all three of those right. I mean, I didn't really pay much attention to the 2012 election, to be honest. I mean, I was still, you know, it was interesting. Somehow when I was a banker, I was less political than I am now. But the 2016 was the one where in some senses, to the degree I have any fame or I got a book deal, it was largely responsible from the fact that I was one of the few people on Twitter, certainly one of the few people on the left saying, "Oh my God, I think Trump's going to win here." And I kind of had said it as a warning, and or as a, and in some senses, nobody wants to be, it was one of those things where I kept saying, it was just so, it wasn't obvious he was going to win, but it was obvious that it wasn't going to be a slam dunk for Clinton by any stretch of the imagination. That this was a real almost coin flip. I just saw the energy out there. Like, I saw the anger coupled with the energy and coupled with the distaste for Hillary. There was just an absolute distaste for her. And so it was kind of like, I didn't care what the polls said. The energy was just there. Polls are one thing but vote, people have to actually physically go vote, and physically go vote is about enthusiasm. And there was just a huge enthusiasm gap. And I was less positioned for this latest election because, like a lot of people, I was kind of, I wasn't as much, I didn't really get out. I didn't start getting out into the country again until I got vaccinated, which was, but I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, I thought, I still think that Trump lost not for all the reasons the media wanted him to lose, but I think he's lost because of his COVID policy. I think, COVID is everything. And, politically, COVID is everything. And almost anybody who's running for office during COVID, while COVID is still there, while COVID, is still limiting what they can do, is going to be voted out. So I think, Biden won because, people believed his, he was going to stop the virus sort of thing. He was going to bring a little bit more rationality to the whole process.
So 2022 midterm election is in 10 months. Biden has been in office for about over a year. And there's also 2024 elections. You are back walking. What are your thoughts? Do you think that the people are happy, satisfied? What does America think, in your opinion?
I mean, predictions this far ahead.
Too early.
Yeah, but the Democrats are toast. I mean, in 2022, I mean, it's going to be ugly. Unless something dramatically changes with COVID, it's going to be really ugly.
Why do you say that? Why do you say that?
COVID is everything. And there are two things going on. I wrote a piece called "The Democrats Are Toast," and it's basically two things, which is, the way people deal with politics. Again, us news junkies are the weirdos. Most people, don't really know what's going on, and that's fine. But you can't be detached from COVID policy. COVID policy has touched everybody through the school system, through the masking, through everything. It's touched everybody. And so has inflation. Inflation's touched everybody. Those two things are considered to be strikes against whoever's in charge. Biden's in charge. So, two strikes, man. Two big strikes. It's quite simple. They let people elected Biden because he said, they want to return to normalcy. Whatever you think about Trump, it was a crazy period. Partly because of COVID, partly because of Trump. They wanted normalcy. It hasn't returned. You can blame him, you can blame COVID, I don't know, but it's not there. And so, I think Biden's team is finally starting to figure that out. And I think they're kind of doing their best to, I mean, I think these are all overword used phrases and whatever, but I was one of the first to say it's now pretty standard to say this, but I think, the bulk of the country has done what they're supposed to do. They've gotten vaccinated, they've gotten boosted if they're above a high risk. People, and I'm talking about people over the age of 50 here. And then they're done. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
I've done what I've been told. It's the right thing to do. I'm going back to having my life.
Yeah.
And so that's where they are. And to the degree they can do that, if by November 2022, I got 10 months now. If
It's about 10, it's 10 months from now. Yeah.
if life is normal, and it feels like you can do whatever you did 4 years ago without any worry, without any scolding, without any supply chain issues, there's a chance Biden can pull it off.
I gotta tell you, Chris, though, I mean, I think my biggest, as an observer, and I try to be as depoliticized as possible, I think I've been extremely disappointed with the public health messaging. I mean, I recall that a lot of people were blaming Trump for the public health messaging and all of these things, and everybody was looking forward to Biden and the public health messaging. And I think the messaging has been at least really awful to citizens and folks. It's very confusing. The CDC is all over the place. I feel the messaging is very difficult to recover from, but we have time to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way it's filtered down to the general public, I don't know who to blame, but it's been bad. There's a sense of, and I think particularly amongst the lower class, and I don't mean, and this is not a left versus right thing. I'm talking about the lower class. I'm talking about Latinos, Blacks, whites. There's a real sense. I would even say it's more than a sense. It's a real, and I think it's a justified sense that all policy has been for the benefit of the elites, the wealthy, been constructed with them in mind, and has screwed the working class. And they've taken all the hits at every juncture, and they've been the ones who've been scolded, and they've been the ones who've been kind of like, but at every process, it's kind of not thought about them. It's put the elites first. And they're tired of it. They're done.
I mean, the idea of that you could just sit home and watch Netflix forever is kind of like, it's like, okay, no, some people actually can't do that. And one of the things that I'll say that sometimes strike me is sometimes, you cruise through Twitter and you see some of the things and people saying, well, you know what, I'm not going to go home. I'm going to order everything out, and I'm going to even order my groceries in. I'm like, you do know that somebody has to actually like, you do realize they just don't appear at your doorstep, right? I'm like,
I remember in the first stage when there was a lockdown, when the lockdown, I jump on Twitter, remind people, I said, there are things called laundry mats, and people need them. like you can't, the first wave of wealthy people buying second homes and deep freezers, versus people I know in the Bronx who live in fourth floor walk-ups with 3 generations and 8 people sharing one bathroom, man. Yeah. And then we closed the parks. Like, but at every level, it just feels like, you go into, it's interesting because I spend time around everybody. And the whole between, I'm pretty, I try not to piss anybody off. I just try to do it when in Rome, do as the Romans. So like, I've been in situations where, people get yelled at for wearing a mask. I've been in situations where people get yelled at for not wearing a mask. So it's just like, I just try to do whatever, like if everybody's masked, I'm masked. If no one's masked, I'm not masked. Like, so it's just kind of one of these things where it's become very politicized. And I just think that the working class rightfully feels like they've been on the short end of every policy. They've been asked to bear the brunt of it all. while everybody else has escaped, relatively without a lot of damage done. And so I think they're just sick of it. They're just done. They're completely, utterly done. And I think, some of that kind of bad messaging and some of that sense of having been wronged is partly why you have the anti-vax crowd. And, I wrote a piece about, it's called Among the Unvaccinated, about how deeply entrenched the vaccine skepticism is among a core group of people. And it's frustrating because I'm not so sure there's anything you can do to reach people at this point because the trust is broken.
Do you, I mean, you've walked so many places in America. Do you ever get scared for your safety? I mean, you go some places, I'm like, oh my goodness, Chris, do you have a gun? Like, what's going on?
No, I'm pretty, I'm pretty, it's not like I also don't take crazy chances. I mean, I do, I do kind of, I guess at this point I know how to operate in certain places. I always say that the key, first of all, I mean, I going back to the idea of wanting to stay in cheap motels is I don't have there are times I barely look beyond homeless myself. I mean, I don't shave. I have long hair. I got.
That's in.
Well, yeah, but I wear the same clothes for 3 days, and that, when I travel overseas, for instance, I have, I pack absurdly light. I have 2 changes of everything, and I wash my one. I have two outfits, and I wash the one in the sink at night to continually wear it, and I do the same thing on the road. I mean, I have have 4 shirts that I wear over and over and over. So it's not like I look like I'm a particularly appealing target. So and then so there's that. I've never had a watch. I don't have jewelry. But also it's kind of I also say that it's how you operate. I really do believe, I always say, if you be confident without being arrogant. Yeah. Like if you're clearly scared, that's like blood in the water. And if you're an arrogant dick, you're also asking for trouble. Yeah. So it's kind of a combination of just be confident without being arrogant. And also, I back down if if somebody wants to kind of be more manly than me, fine, you win. I don't really care.
So your last trip was to Kiev, to Russia, and I followed this religiously on Twitter. I have actually a lot of Russian friends. I have a lot of friends also from Ukraine. And I want to, it was a lot of fun to see the pictures because they were not necessarily glamorous pictures. I felt I was actually watching the real Kiev as opposed not watching the most elite places. A, why did you pick Kiev? And B, I gotta tell you, one of my favorite posts that you put on was when you were mentioning about that the US talking about the tension with Russia and almost war and so forth, and then you put like a short clip of the Ukrainians skating, and they're like,
yeah.
Music and I laughed so hard. I literally was LOL. I'm like, that was pretty good. That was classic Chris.
Yeah, I mean, why I chose Kiev, I combination of really cheap flight.
Do you speak Russian? Do you speak Russian?
No, none. But I'm one of my, what my biggest weakness in life is I don't languages. I'm dyslexic. I can barely speak English. But I can't learn languages at all, which is very frustrating. But I had gone to Bucharest in December. I really liked Bucharest. Why I went to Bucharest is just, I had always been interested in Romania. But I kind of got stir crazy. I was at home and I was planning to stay here all January, and my wife looked at me and goes, you need to get out of the house, go. So I just go, I had spent a lot of time looking at maps. When I was in Bucharest, I was trying to think of places to go. And Kiev popped up, and I Google Street viewed it, looked interesting to walk. But also it was just cheap flights. I found like a round trip for like $380. And I'm like, I spent lots of time looking for cheap flights, and and then there was also all the hubbub of like, oh my God, Russian invasion. I'm, I've been doing this long enough to know when there's like a big, when the State Department tells you not to do something, it's usually wrong. Like
this is the time to do it.
Yes, exactly. Which is partially why it was cheap, I think. And I found an extraordinarily cheap apartment to rent for a few weeks. And so I went, and I also really like being in places like, like Kiev during the winter. Like if you're gonna go to Kiev, go during the winter. You know what I mean?
That is pretty interesting. You were even arguing with somebody on Twitter, like he was saying, answer like, "Why are you going to Kiev in the winter?" And you said, "I like the cold." Okay, I like the cold.
Yeah, and I like the cold, but it's kind of like if you like this, just go all the way, man. Like if you like X, do triple X. So. But also the other reason is one of the things I've been really fascinated by both in Bucharest and Kiev is kind of the Soviet era apartment complexes, the planned communities, which is I'm actually writing my Kiev piece right now, is what I'm writing about, this kind of the planned community that's up in the northeast of Kiev. It's on the east side of the river. That's a part of Kiev I spent most of the time in. These kind of I can't pronounce the name of the neighborhood. I forget it. I just wrote it down, but it's kind of their version of the suburbs or the planned community that are all these. I think it was Khrushchev. I think it was Brezhnev era apartment complexes, and but you can photograph them better with no leaves on the trees. So in the winter, you got better chances to take the pictures. And I hadn't realized that's not why I'd gone to Bucharest in the cold, but then it was one of the things that struck me is, wow, I can actually really see the cityscape without the trees better. And kind of, so that's partially why I went to Kiev. But it was the cheap flight really helped. And so you're like, yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised. I was never worried about going, even though a lot of people told me to be worried. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that I know, like when the U.S. State Department and Biden and all these people say, Dava or whatever, it's like, man, like it's gonna be okay. Like the most surreal thing was there was a skate. I was at the mall there with ice skating on the night when it's just like, so it's really weird to be in Kiev and like, I'm active on Twitter, unfortunately, but looking at the Twitter,
good. You've got almost 100,000 followers.
So I'm looking at it like, looking at Twitter at this stuff. And then it's like, just seeing the dialogue, like I'm in a war zone apparently. And like, there's people skating here. Like I would have had no fucking clue anything was going on if it wasn't like, there wasn't anything going on. And so my last night in Kiev was again, like the State Department issued this order for all people to get out, like all Americans to get out. All non-essential State Department employees have to leave, all family. And I'm sitting there looking at my phone going, fuck, because this means that the airport's gonna be crowded. Like, I mean, I don't it's like 10 o'clock at night. I'm at my favorite bar, which is a beer and fish bar. And I'm like, oh God. And I have to get up at 6. I'm like, I should probably just go home and sleep because the airports can be crowded with, like all these people trying to get out because they quote have to get out. And instead I go to another bar, which is where they're doing karaoke till 3 a.m. And like, I'm sitting in this bar with a bunch of, Ukrainians doing karaoke. And looking at Twitter saying, "Oh, there's going to be imminent Russian invasion." I'm like, no, there's not.
Crazy. Then you also, you purposely like to ride buses and like.
Oh, I absolutely love buses. Yeah, I absolutely love. So one of the things I do when I walk into town is I have to use public transportation. I refuse to take cabs, and so part is like some of my walks are big circles. but most of them are also, I just end at a place. I'm like, okay, time to get home. How are you going to get home? And that generally means taking buses. And I absolutely love I think it's called, I think in Kiev they're called marushkas or marushkas. I forget the name. They're basically hack buses. So they're, they're not the official lines. They're not the official city buses. They're just guys who get a bus and run the route of the bus. And, the buses themselves, the official buses are cheap enough. I mean, they're eight, whatever the currency is. So they're basically eight out of 28 is what, roughly 30 cents, right, to get a bus anywhere or a metro. These are 10, so they're like 35 cent. But you just toss your 35-cent piece onto a carpet they have at front, and that's it. And you just cram in with everybody else. And I really like them because they decorate them. I'm sure they're not particularly safe. I'm sure they're not regulated.
Hey. So two things, and I promise I'll let you go. I can't. I just want to keep talking to you for the next 2 hours. It's hard to let you go because I'm enjoying this. So I'm being very selfish here.
No, go ahead, keep them going. I'm fine.
But so where's your next trip? How international and local? Where are you going internationally and locally? Because you did put a post asking people to vote where you should go. I thought that was very interesting. You were asking Peru or you put 4 choices. I forgot what I voted for you.
I said either Quito, Ecuador, Lima, Minsk, Belarus.
Oh, I voted for Minsk. I
kind of wanted Minsk to win, but Minsk didn't win, and Lima won, so I'm going to go to Lima. What I really wanted to do was La Paz, but Bolivia, but it's 13,000 feet, which would be tough. But my father was also from Bolivia, so I kind of want to go to Bolivia. But the flight connections to Bolivia are not easy. Like it's complicated to get to La Paz. And I only had a short amount of time because of family issues. So I only had 12 days. I couldn't use 3 of them traveling. So I'm going to go to Lima. But Lima also won.
When are you going? When are you going?
I'm going in March. So I'm going to do Lima, but before then, I'm going to do, my goal is basically to do like 10 US cities and like 5 international cities. That's kind of what I think I can do. I'm going to do a lot more US cities around the election because I'm probably going to work with some website on the 2020 elections. So I'll be doing stuff more around August and November in the US.
Can I bring you back during the elections just for one more time?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy. Happy to. But I'm gonna go to Jacksonville. I'm leaving Saturday for Jacksonville. I'm gonna do Jacksonville, Florida, and I'm gonna do Charleston, South Carolina. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna basically do a 2-week trip, a week in Jacksonville, a week in Charleston, and then I come home, and then I'm gonna fly to Peru, and then I come home, and I'm probably gonna do after that 3 more US cities. I'm not sure where. I may break my rule and actually.
I think you should come to Chicago actually.
My daughter lives in Chicago. I was in Chicago, and
it has changed a lot, and I really think you would.
I have 4 walks I want to do in Chicago. I already have them mapped out. When I went to visit my daughter in Chicago, and when was it? March or no? When was it? October, I think it was. I did walk from downtown. I had intended to go north, but that was boring. So I walked basically due west towards O'Hare. I think I forget maybe 14th Street, maybe I went across. There's this, all I remember, whatever street I walked through Little Ukrainia.
Yep.
But I went to the highlight of my trip was there's this old Mexican Western wear store kind of west of downtown that absolutely I loved. It was kind of near, I get, what's it called? Little Ukraine? Little Ukraine, is that what?
Ukrainian village.
Yeah, near Ukrainian village. This is a Western West. I now that I've been in Ukraine, I kind of want to go back to Ukrainian village. But I mean, I kind of walked out west, and then I ended up making some miscalculations. But so yeah, when I do big cities like I did DC recently, you can't really do the whole city. You kind of got to do a neighborhood. You kind of, and one of my walks I want to do is basically from downtown to Gary. That's one walk I
Oh,
want to
wow. That's just
do. So that's a walk I really was going to do, and I just didn't have the time to do it. I mean, so I would walk basically from downtown to Gary, and then the other walk is basically from downtown to O'Hare, and then the third walk is from downtown to basically I forget that there's some suburb in the north, and so those are kind of three walks.
Yeah, you will need to let me know when you're here, because I definitely would want to see you in person.
Yeah.
Any book in your future? New book?
No, not really. I mean, I did write a novel when I was during COVID. I wrote a novel about banking. I got to finish writing that. I mean, I got to clean that up and get it published. So I did. I need to write a fourth draft to clean it up before publishing it. So, but that's been sitting on the back burner because I've been kind of like I got too close to it. And I need some distance to see to fix it. To fix it.
Is it like true story or fiction?
It's fiction. It was basically kind of it was my first chimp. I, like a lot of people, I realized I was going to be stuck inside for like 6 months. And so I decided to write fiction, to give it a shot.
I really, as a reader, I think there's another book for you for like international. I think it would be great to have some photography and just a little bit of observation of the international travel and bring it home in terms of contrasting to US versus non-US especially in the pandemic. I mean, I just wonder, I think the pandemic brings so many things that I would say think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of doing that. So what I do on my Substack is I try to write an essay about each of the cities, and the essays on the foreign cities are basically turning into that. They're turning into kind of a compare and contrast to the U.S. After Lima, I'm going to do. Hopefully this summer I'm going to go to Asia, and I got basically 5 international cities I want to do before the end of the year. But try to balance kind of like, again, try to balance geography. I don't want to do too many Eastern European, too many African, too many Latin American cities. So, but.
Oh, well, look, this is amazing. First of all, I definitely want to bring you back if your time allows close to November, because by then you would have walked a lot. I was never into politics, I'll admit, but your book Dignity, as well as some of the observation I've been seeing in terms of the out of touch people with real America, have made me very interested in what's going to happen in 2022 in the midterm elections. So that's why I would be very curious in your observations in about 9 months or so. It's hard to believe it's in 9 months. It's like we're February already.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of disappointing.
Why?
I know politics. Politics is getting. I'm starting to see you're getting into politics, and I'm getting bored by politics. So
I know, but I mean, I think what got me a little bit interested in it is the policy of COVID. Just got me really fed up. Boy, Chris, it's been really such a treat to have you on my podcast. It's my
well, thank you, and I'm more than happy to come back and you just send me a message when you want to, and I'll happily do another hour some other time.
Absolutely, and because I need to make sure I have to send you the T-shirt of the Healthcare Unfiltered podcast. So I'll get your address after we just get off the air. Well, Chris Arnade, thank you so much for coming on Healthcare Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for having me, and take care, and thank you everybody for listening.